Hello, my name is Chris Piotta. I spent 25 years with the Federal Bureau of Investigation and worked in a number of different capacities ranging from national security, law enforcement, public safety, and other government operations at the highest levels in the nation. I also did a lot of work overseas in the law enforcement intelligence communities. There's a lot of talk right now among the national leaders and among the news media as to whether Antifa really exists or Antifa is a group. I can tell you Antifa does exist. Antifa is a movement. Antifa is a group of people who subscribe to a set of ideologies and tactics in their civil disobedience. So, distributed model, decentralized movement, leaderless resistance type of model. They show up in places, they're all dressed the same, they have the same tactics. They seem to know what to do. They understand verbal commands. They've received training. They have received funding. They have received logistical support. So that's a pretty organized group. And I think when you hear people now saying that Antifa doesn't exist, I think what you're looking at is political wrangling. And you're looking at people who want to deny the fact that there is I could say, an anarchist, Marxist, leftist movement that seeks to destroy or undermine basically American society. So, uh, looking at Antifa, started up in, I'd say, the early 1930s in Weimar Germany. They were actually born out of the German Communist Party as a way to combat the rising nationalist party under Adolf Hitler, also known as the Nazi Party. And but Antifa also fought with other left-wing groups that it disagreed with, and went through World War II. Term fascist back then was largely the merging of nationalist movements with authoritarianism. In today's world, fascism seems to be anything that you don't like or any set of authorities that you don't agree with is fascist, according to our Antifa friends. In looking at Antifa and how it came to the United States, you're looking at the 1970s, 1980s timeframe where Antifa had a resurgence to combat what it saw as the rise of neo-Nazi movements or white supremacist movements. It made good sense in Europe that Antifa would see that resurgence. But what also happened in that 1970s and 80s timeframe is that we also saw an export of Antifa ideologies and practices to the United States, mostly through the punk rock scene and the punk culture that was evolving and moving through Europe at the time. It wasn't an exchange of people, it was an exchange of culture that brought Antifa and the Antifa approach to the United States. Later, we saw that Antifa had a more formalized presence. The World Trade Organization protests of 1999, where we saw the introduction of the Black Bloc approach, the common dark dress, the organized tactics of the people in the Seattle area that actually set law enforcement back on their heels. Law enforcement wasn't ready for the tactics and the approaches that the early Antifa brought to that protest environment. You also saw Antifa protesting during the early years of the beginning of the Gulf War. So they became a more visible, more organized group. And people are saying they're not organized. They're most certainly organized. You don't show up wearing the same clothing, obeying the same verbal commands, using the same tactics, having the same approach to things unless you're organized. And I think also the introduction of the internet was able to spread those ideologies and tactics out into that leaderless resistance environment. You had a group of people who didn't necessarily have to have a central leader. In their regions, they knew what they were supposed to do and they knew where they were supposed to show up. Antifa started, I guess you can say, evolving and maturing and really made its presence known after the 2016 US presidential elections, where Donald Trump became the president, and Antifa became much more prominent as a social influence when it came to civil disobedience, protesting. Their activities ranged anywhere from simple protesting, holding signs, yelling, screaming, making noise, through the destruction of property, anarchist behavior, through violence against people where people were actually injured, beaten, and property was damaged. Bad news. They moved in through the Trump years, quieted down during the last Biden administration, and now they're making a resurgence again that Trump is back in office. We see what's going on out in Portland and other places around the country. What we're looking at is what is our law enforcement going to do about it? What are our authorities going to do about this? Can't have this behavior going on. You can't have our society and our communities being subjected to violence and having their lives disrupted day to day by what is pretty much bad behavior by these folks. President Trump recently designated Antifa as a domestic terrorism organization, and they're considering making it an international terrorist organization because of its European and nationwide roots around the world. Our legal system is not set up to handle this leaderless resistance, this distributed model. Our law enforcement tends to look for individual acts of violence or illegal activities. What we have to do is be able to corral this behavior, this movement, and make sure that it is checked from ruining our communities and putting our people in danger. What are the authorities doing? Well, right now, they're looking at the logistics, they're looking at the funding streams, they're looking at people who provide support and enable Antifa to move from protest site to protest site. They show up with professionally made signs. They have actually fashioned weapons. They have tactics. They are trained. And that's what law enforcement is looking at right now. Who's providing that support? And they will also continue to focus on the individual acts of violence, the trespassing, the damage of property, the assault of people, things of that sort. It'll be interesting to see where this goes and how our law enforcement and our governing parties deal with this Antifa type of movement. Something for you all to think about. Love to hear what your thoughts are on how it can be addressed, how it should be addressed. Where do we draw lines in our society when it comes to constitutionally protected language and activities versus moving into acts of violence versus riding the seams of our systems where you can not do something illegal, but it is disruptive and it is hurtful to people, but you almost seem to be protected by the Constitution. A lot of things that have to be worked out by legal scholars, our public safety officials, and our government. My opinion, they're real. They're here. A couple things to think about. One, the FBI back in the 1920s and 30s denied the existence of the Mafia. They said the Mafia didn't exist. Now, who knows why? I would think it's because the FBI didn't want to look bad. The fact that they didn't have that taken care of and it was out of their control. The FBI denied the Mafia's existence. And in, I think it was 1957, there was a meeting in upstate New York at a place called Appalachian, where the FBI found all of these crime families meeting and coordinating their efforts. The FBI was then forced to treat organized crime as an enterprise, acknowledge its presence, and then work on it as an enterprise crime problem. Here's another example for you. The Crips and the Bloods, two gangs that have been around for decades, national level gangs. Neither of those gangs have what you would consider to be a national leader. They don't have a national infrastructure. What they do is they operate in regional sets or chapters, as they're called, and they operate under a set of cultural norms and practices for each gang. So you can export that ideology, those values, beliefs, practices among a group of people who all know how to behave in a certain fashion, roughly, but there is no central leadership. There is no central structure. law enforcement has been able to work against the Crips and the Bloods, they have to take what they learned and apply that to how they're going to uh, deal with the Antifa issue. Also, second item in the rearview mirror, the Charlie Kirk assassination. It was a tragic issue. But one thing I will say for my law enforcement colleagues, my former colleagues, before you move forward on this investigative effort, you must match the ballistics of the bullet that actually killed Charlie Kirk to the weapon that was recovered that was matched to the suspected shooter. If that gun did not fire the bullet that killed Charlie Kirk, then they have some explaining to do. They have to match the ballistics bullet, gun, suspect. And until they close that chain, this is going to remain an open issue. And I'm sorry to say that Charlie Kirk's assassination is already heading into the rearview mirror, but it is, and we'll keep you posted on anything that I find out from any of my colleagues. Deepest of gratitude to our law enforcement, military, firefighters, our emergency services personnel who work tirelessly to keep us safe. I also want to thank everybody, and there are too many out there, but the people who work day in and day out to keep society running. Thank you very much.